When I was 5 years old, our family was living in Princeton, New Jersey. At least part of our family was there. My two brothers, who were 10 and 12 years older, Ted, 10 years older, and Bill, 12 years older, were still in India, where our family had been for many years. They were going to boarding school there, and when they came back to the States, it made a tough adjustment for teenage boys. Neither of them fitted in terrifically well at first to American society. Especially Ted had a problem. Going to Princeton High School, he started hanging out with the wrong crowd, and within a few months he'd nearly run afoul of the law. My parents were worried about him. They consulted with him and with others, and they decided it would be best, if he wanted to, which he did, to go back to India and finish the year in boarding school there. In those days, the school year was halfway off the school year in the States, in India. It had to do with the seasons there, just as it had to do with the seasons here, and the seasons were different there. So the time off was in our winter here. He would have arrived back in Princeton, maybe in time for Christmas. He'd made his way back from India by himself at 15, and he had various travels to tell us about. But the one thing that stuck in my mind as a kindergartner, 5 years old, worshiping this older brother who'd come back from all the way around the globe, all by himself on big airplanes, the thing that impressed me most that he had to talk about was an episode in Switzerland, where he had stayed in a hotel, some sort of small hotel, where there'd been a beautiful chambermaid. Beautiful, maybe a few years older than he was, and he'd fallen for her without being able to say much to her, but he'd really been infatuated with her, all except her name. I said, What was wrong with her name? Ted said to me, Dick, her name was Zupek. That's not the kind of name a girl should have. I was listening, and I said, No, that's not the kind of name a girl should have. If Ted said so, it was true. Wasn't the kind of name. Zupek wasn't, that a girl should have in Switzerland or anywhere else. And I said, Well, who should have a name like that? And Ted said to me, Well, a name like Zupek, I think that would be a better name for a cat than a girl, don't you? And I wasn't sure. I had to think about this. And I did think about it, but I didn't talk about it with anyone else. And then things happened in our lives. We moved within the next year to Ithaca, New York. I was a big boy now, not in kindergarten anymore. I was starting elementary school. I was 6 years old by now. And in the fall of that year, 1955, right after we'd moved to Ithaca, someone gave me a kitten. Who, I'm not sure. It might have been someone in the Dalton family. I have a feeling it might have been the Daltons. They had a litter of kittens. They gave me one, and I promptly named this male kitten Zupek, because Zupek was a better name for a cat than for a girl. I didn't care that it wasn't a girl kitten. I had remembered what Ted had said, and I named my kitten Zupek. When I told Ted what the kitten's name was, he said, Zupek, that's a strange name. Where'd you come up with that? I said, Well, don't you remember? You told me. It was when you were going through Switzerland last year. There was a maid at your hotel, and she had a bad name for a girl. It was Zupek, and you thought it'd be a better name for a cat. Did I? He says. Ted was a joker, then and always. He liked to keep hidden what his real thoughts were. Later in life, he became a spy. Ted's life in the D.I.A., the Defense Intelligence Agency. Not the CIA, those were cowboys. Ted's side of things was more scholarly and academic and more helpful to the international situation. But just as secret, he was still a spy, and he was still kidding with the world. He told me that during the Cuban Missile Crisis, he and his pals, after spotting the missile silos in Cuba and spotting the truck movements, all from their aerial photography inspection, and by now he was in his 20s, and he had brought home things and had shown me how to look through a stereoscope to bring up the terrain, the topography, and everything. They had found the missile sites, and in the 2 weeks leading up to Kennedy's announcement that missiles had been found in Cuba, and then during the 13 days of the Cuban Missile Crisis, Ted and his cohorts were very busy at the Pentagon. They had cots, they stayed there around the clock, they slept, and when they were rested, they got back to work looking for more missile sites. That's what he told me. I never knew for sure. He was a kidder all his life. He said at one point that JFK himself had sent him a letter of commendation after the missile crisis, but that because his job was so secret, Ted's job, not JFK's, Ted's, they had to keep his letter of commendation in a special file at the Pentagon, and it was classified, so I couldn't see it. No one could see it. We had to take his word for it, that it was there. Anyway, when I told him my kitten's name was Zupek, he was skeptical. And when I told him it had been his idea that I name my kitten Zupek, or that somebody should name a cat Zupek, or that Zupek was a name suitable only for a cat and not for a beautiful Swiss girl, he was more skeptical, but he was a kidder. I had learned this about him even by the time I was 6, when I got my kitten. By the time I was 7, we had built our house at 118 North Sunset Drive. We had been living at 109 North Sunset Drive when I was given my kitten. But by the time I was in 2nd grade, our house was built. I had watched with my little kid's potbelly hanging out and sometimes holding Zupek in my arms. I think I was the only one Zupek let hold him. Zupek grew up to be a big tomcat. He was never fixed. He got in lots of fights. He would come back from his roaming and carousing, and he'd have his forehead ripped open and pus leaking from it, maybe a little of his ear ripped away. And another time he'd come back and he'd have a gouge on his belly or something. But he was a beautiful cat, nonetheless, my Zupek. He slept on my feet at night in my bed. I'd be lying in my bed and I would feel this big weight pounce on the end of my bed, because he was a big cat by then. And I'd know he was going to curl up on top of my feet, and that's how we slept. It was very comforting having a little purring pal like that. It was me he came to sleep with, not any of the others. I fed him. We didn't have a cat box for him because he had the whole out of doors for all of those sorts of functions. And he went out into the great out of doors. He brought back chipmunks. He brought back birds. He left them as tokens on our front porch. And we felt bad about this, but he was a tomcat. He was following nature's call. He went out and he bred little Zupeks probably up and down North Sunset Drive. I don't know. There were some unimaginable yowls coming from the darkness sometimes. But he grew bigger, and so did I. The years passed, and finally I became 15, as Ted had been 15 when he had gotten back from Switzerland. I had admired him so much for traveling on his own. Now, when I was 15, I went off into the world by myself, on my own, on a great big ship called the France. I sailed alone, well, with about 1,000 other people, 2,000, from New York to Southampton to Le Havre. And I spent the year in France at a French boarding school. I did a considerable amount of hitchhiking around in Europe by myself when I was 15 and 16. Independence was nothing new to members of the Mosier family. We weren't particularly coddled in my family by either of our parents. But on our father's side, it was a little more benign. On our mother's side, it could sometimes verge on neglect. The time I wasn't brought back from the movie theater in downtown Ithaca, when someone had dropped me off there, and the feature ended. It was the late feature. It ended around 10 or 11 o'clock. All the people who'd been in the theater left, went on their way in pairs and singly off into the night. The lights in the marquee were turned off. The popcorn machine operator, the projectionist, left, went home. Whoever it was who locked up clicked the lock on the darkened theater and walked home. I was there waiting for my ride. I was maybe 10 at that point. My ride was my mother, and she'd forgotten me. Eventually, I made my way to a payphone and called home. I think everyone was in bed by then. They'd forgotten I wasn't in bed because no one put me to bed or anything. I put myself to bed. But this isn't Dickens. This is just an American story here. So I went off to France. I had a good year in France. I covered a lot of miles during the vacations. I learned French, and I learned what it was like to attend a foreign boarding school. Part of what had made it hard for Ted, I think, attending boarding school in India and then trying to fit into North American society, was that he had been living in the small mountains that were the foothills, so-called, to the Himalayan mountains. It's hard to come back to another place where you have honor society and marching band and things like that are the high points of people's lives, when the boarding school you'd been going to, Ted had been going to, had hikes up these Himalayan mountains where he and his friend had almost gotten frostbite and lost toes. Smaller than a full-scale Himalayan Everest, but a big mountain by our standards here. In their Ked sneakers, a snowstorm had enveloped them and they could have perished. They made it back to tell the tale. Ted kept a scrapbook about it that I looked through years later. After that kind of thing, it was hard to fit into a high school in Princeton, New Jersey. No wonder he was tempted to take up petty theft or whatever it was that got him in trouble in Princeton. And he'd fallen for this girl, Zupek. And he'd forgotten her name was Zupek. Maybe he'd forgotten her. But I hadn't. I'd heard him, and now I had Zupek, the cat. And so by the time I went off to France, I was 15. I'd been given Zupek when I was 6. So Zupek was 9 years old. When I came back on a different ship, not a fancy, huge, big luxury liner like the France had been, but a smaller tub of a boat, a student ship, which was much more fun for a kid of 16 now than the France ever could be, where they played the song Woolly Bully over and over, the band that must have gotten free passage on the ship as payment for playing Woolly Bully 1,000 times. And I never got tired of it. I never have gotten tired of it since, because it always brings that voyage back to me. Woolly Bully, and drinking Heineken beer on this great ship. Little tub of a thing. The Grote Beer, a Dutch ship. I rowed it back. We went past the Statue of Liberty at dawn, all groggy. We got off the ship in New York. And my mother was there in our family's little white MGBGT or something like it. It was a bunch of initials anyway. It was a little boxy white car. It wasn't an MG sports car. It was the equivalent of a Volkswagen. She and I lashed my footlocker on top of it, and we drove back to Ithaca. We didn't lash the footlocker on top very well. It wouldn't fit in the trunk of this little boxy car. So we had to put it on top. We tied it with ropes. Someone honked at us on Highway 17, halfway between New York City and Ithaca, and we pulled off the road and saw to our horror that the trunk was starting to slip down the back and had nearly come off the car. We made it to Ithaca, Mom and I. I was glad to be home. Didn't ask many questions about what had gone on while I'd been away. I was very tired. We went to bed. The next day I got up, was looking around the house, looking around the neighborhood. And I said casually to Mom, "Where's Zupek?" She said, "Zupek?" And I said, "Mom, Zupek, my cat, black, with a white diamond on his chest. My cat, Mom." Because I didn't trust that look on her face. She wasn't a kidder. She was a manipulator, my mother. She didn't want to answer some question about Zupek. I knew this instantly when I asked. And she said, "Well, now, Zupek got sick not long after you left, and I had to take him to the vet." Mom, what happened? She had never voluntarily taken Zupek to the vet. She had grown up on a farm in central Illinois. I asked her if they had had cats on their farm at Hall Hill. And she said, "Oh, just a bunch of barn cats. There was always 4 or 5 of them." And I said, "Was there ever a house cat? Cat you let into your home and made your pet?" And she said, "Well, there was only one, but my father shot it once because it was annoying him. And he missed the cat, and I think he shot his toe or something. It caused no end of trouble." I said, "What caused no end of trouble? Your father shooting his gun or this?" "Mom, where is Zupek?" She said, "Well, he got very sick." I said, "Yes, you said that before, but I'm not sure I believe you. Is he still around, Mom?" And she said, "Well, no, he's not anymore. He's not with us anymore. I had to take him to the vet, and the vet said there was nothing to be done for him." "He's dead, is he?" "Yes, Dick, he is." "Was he your cat?" "Mom, he always slept in my room. I fed him. He was given to me as a kitten. I named him." "Oh, did you? Didn't know that." She acted as if Zupek had crept in from the wild, and perhaps she, out of the goodness of her farm girl heart, had put up with him for years. "Where did he die, Mom?" "Well, I took him to the vet school." "You took him to the vet school? I thought you took him to a veterinarian." And she said, "Well, yes, but, the vet school offered better prices." "And he died there? Did they give him a shot or something and he died?" "Oh, he died of natural causes," she said. I hadn't asked, but she was answering a loaded question even before I thought to ask it. This meant he'd been murdered. "Mom, you had him put down, didn't you? Because you wanted to go travel in Europe." "Well, no, he was sick," she said. So finally I started asking around. I asked my sister, as the one plausible witness, since my mother was not a credible witness. "And do you know what happened to Zupek?" And she said, "I hoped you weren't going to ask this. I was hoping Mom would tell you, but I guess that's more than we can expect. I said to Anne, look, I won't blame you. I know you didn't do anything to him. Well, Mom took Zupek to the vet school, said Anne. Was he sick? I said. Not that I know of, said Anne. He seemed fine to me, but she took him to the vet school and she didn't bring him back. When I quizzed her about it, what they'd done with his body once they'd killed him, because that seemed to be what had happened, she said, to save expenses, what they do with these animals is they burn them up. They incinerate them. In a chimney? I said. Like in the death camps in Germany, in Poland? They gave Zupek the Auschwitz treatment? Well, said Anne, I wouldn't go that far, but something like that, yes. They incinerated him. So that's the tale of my cat Zupek, with the lovely glossy black fur and the beautiful white diamond on his chest. And the rogue habits, it's true, but he was good to me. He didn't bite me. He didn't scratch me, not too often. Only when I provoked him, which wasn't too often either. I liked Zupek, and he knew it. He slept on my feet. I was by far the youngest child in our family. I had no playmates. I played by myself, and Zupek was my friend. And when I went off to school, my mother had him murdered. So that tells you a few things about me, about my tomcat Zupek, and about my mother.